Hi everyone, my name is Amy Varsek. I'm the exhibitions director and curator at the Duluth Art Institute, and tonight we're meeting with local artist Susanna Gaunt. Susanna's solo exhibition, Integument, is on view in our George Morrison Gallery through the end of the year until December 31st, 2020. Integument includes a variety of forms that invites viewers to examine their details, noting differences with curiosity and wonder. Gaunt remarks her work is often enhanced with the use of layers that conceal enough to raise questions and reveal enough to suggest answers. And tonight, if you have questions for Susanna, please join in our chat. But for now, we'll say hello. Hi, Susanna.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much. I want to actually say a big thank you to both Amy Varsik and to Alyssa Swanson, who is behind the scenes at the moment, but also to the Duluth Art Institute for this opportunity, both to have an artist talk, but also to be able to show my work in the George Morrison Gallery.
Well, thank you, Susanna. I've been looking forward to this show forever. You applied during, I think it was the 2020 open call for submissions, and that work has been reviewed well over a year ago. So we've known the show is coming, and we've all been really excited about it. And part of the excitement is that unknown piece. All of this work you created specifically for the show. Can you tell us what inspired you with this work?
Well, I mean, looking at all of my work, including stuff that I've created prior to this show, definitely the natural world. There's a link to the natural world in my work. And I think if you look a little bit below the surface, the work itself reflects on my own personal interactions with the natural world, my observations, my experiences. And then even going deeper than that, I'm definitely passionate about the environment, and I don't consider myself a social artist, like one that has a social agenda in her work, but I do definitely do a lot of research about the history of the relationship that man has had to nature, especially in the Western culture. And so I'm sure that sort of infuses itself into my work. But for me, the research I do, I read a lot of natural history books. I'm especially love ones that are anecdotal about the world right outside our door. So stories about your backyard or the trail park nearby. And so some of those artists might include, or some of those artists might include Annie Dillard, who wrote Pilgrim at Tinker Creek, and Robin Wall Kimmerer, if I'm saying her name right, who wrote Braiding Sweetgrass. I'm really, really inspired and admire the way that they can create wonder, a feeling of wonder in their words. So we don't have any visuals. I'm a visual person, and we have, I feel like I can be brought into the experiences that they write about. And so I really admire that, and that's something that I try and bring into my work if I can. I'm definitely innately curious. You talked about curiosity and wonder with my work. That's definitely something that's important to me. And so that curiosity that I feel about the natural world, if I can convey that in my work, then I'm definitely happy or satisfied by that.
Well, one of the pieces that just came into my mind was a weaving in which you combine two different focuses, and one of them is actually words from a journal. And that nods very well to your references of your the books that you're talking about. Can you tell us about that weaving piece in particular that has the journal writing woven into it?
Absolutely. So that is what I call almanac, or even I've thought about calling it spring almanac, because it really was about this past spring. And what's interesting, I guess, about it is I didn't want my work. I started this body of work, as you said, over a year ago, and then COVID hit, and I didn't want to have too much influence on the work from COVID. Like, I didn't want it to be about that experience. But at the same time, because of COVID, my family and I spent a lot of time taking hikes around the area. And so those little writings that are in the weaving are different anecdotes from our experiences on those different hikes. And so I don't think we have a visual of it right now, but each one is sort of like a little patch. I actually liken them to lichen. There's a lichen in the area. Not going to get the name right, but it basically references umbilical, like the umbilical area, because they look like little belly buttons. That's a little bit of an aside, but anyway, so each section has an anecdote to it, and each anecdote tells about our little experience, our short moment to get together, and also some species that we interacted with. And most of the species are animals, but there are a few plants as well, incorporated into each anecdote. And so it allowed me to remember the moment. I actually recorded the time of day and the weather, and then also to go and research that species a little bit. And I think what you might be getting at too is that was a way for me to share those interactions that I have in a quite literal way, although the weaving, because they're woven between layers, the words get broken up and they're a little harder to read. You have to pretty much work at it to be able to read what it says. So.
Mm-hmm. And I think that nods to that sense of wonder within the details. That if someone does look closely enough at your work, it will start to reveal these other layers. And I think to me, some of the more obvious pieces that might not be obvious to everyone are the molt, the encaustic wax pieces that to me represent that external surface of potentially an animal, or it could be a plant. And I know you have talked a lot about your inspiration coming from nature, and I know that you have in the past been an avid collector of bits of nature. And I think that image to me translates into these large scale pieces. Can you talk about maybe what they represent, or how they could be seen as parts of a curious collection?
Yeah, so you bring up a couple of things, good things in terms of the transition of my old work to my new work, but also what those specific pieces are representing. And yes, very much for me, they represent exoskeletons, which are that shed layer of especially insects when they grow out basically out of their skin. And just finding those, that moment of wonder when I find one on a tree or on the ground or on a rock, I don't know, I just love that feeling. And so I wanted to be able to share that basically with these somewhat abstract forms. I mean, they're definitely also inspired by natural forms, and but yet at the same time, abstract them a little bit so that they're more creatures that you might not know what they actually are. So yes, definitely exoskeletons inspired those pieces. You had said to me as we were installing that they looked alive, and another person said that to me later, and that just is super satisfying, because that's exactly what I want the experience to be, because that's how it feels when you find them in nature. I've even come upon them and been like, is that the bug? And I get really slowly and carefully get closer and closer, and then realize, no, it's actually just the leftover remains of that bug. And that's just fun to be able to have that experience. So you talk about collections, and for folks who don't know my work just prior to this, I looked a lot at specimen collections, my own personal collections. I collect a lot of bones, a lot of skulls, a lot of exoskeletons, dead bugs. I joke about how my mantelpiece is not full of candles, but full of dead things instead. And so I made a pretty conscious choice, or maybe it was just below conscious choice, that with this body of work, I wanted to move away from the object and more towards the experience. And so while I'm producing an object, I mean, in the end, it is an object. I wanted to look more at the process in nature, and how, if I can be in that process rather than be a collector and then set that object aside. There would be more engagement. I would be more of a player in the experience. And so I think I'm still exploring that idea, but this was the first attempt at that, or a first go at that. And so those pieces do end up being an object in the end, but for me, they're a record of the process of me making the work, just like an exoskeleton is a record of the insect that left, went through that transformation and left the exoskeleton behind. Does that make sense?
Well, and I know we've talked about part of your process in building your work, moving from a two-dimensional plane. Oh, you've consistently moved away from the wall. And I think in this exhibition, you even have pieces that come completely off the wall and become more three-dimensional. And you have mentioned that that's a bit of a struggle for you to work in 3D. Can you talk about that struggle?
Yeah, definitely. And I want to just give a little bit of history for those who don't know my work too, that I've got about a 25-year history of working in photography before I switched to other mediums. And that's a very two-dimensional medium to work in. And towards the end of that period, I was definitely aching to change things up and move off the wall a little bit. And so I went to UMD to get a BFA and learn about all these different mediums. And that's where I started gravitating towards installation art. And so I would say in the last body of work, which was also installation art, the one about collections, I did get off the wall a little bit. I had a piece that moved through the room, but if you looked at it, it still had kind of a flat surface to it. It was a bunch of tags that hung from the ceiling in a semi two-dimensional way that curved around. But I have, other than that, really struggled to get off the wall. And Amy and I've laughed about this together. And I think there's a couple challenges for me that go on. One is that when you've got a sculpture that's off the wall, it's on the ground, hanging from the ceiling on a pedestal, there's so many angles to look at it from. I think Alyssa might have even talked about this last week in her artist talk, but you get three sides, right? But then the fourth side looks like crap. And so that has been a real struggle for me. If you've got a wall, you just stick the fourth side against the wall. But if I can, I'm definitely not mastered it by any means, but I'm finding it's a really good exercise to train yourself to start seeing from all different kinds of angles on one hand, but also how does a three-dimensional piece inhabit a space? And with installation art, we think about that anyway, but when you move it into the room and into the middle of the room, how does it inhabit that space? And there's some exciting things that can start to happen with that. And so I think, even if I haven't reached that with this body of work, I can see potential for that interactive piece that installation art and then three-dimensional art can have, because you're forcing the viewer to walk around it, or you're forcing the viewer to look down upon it, or up at it, or whatever, as opposed to when it's on the wall, it's like, oh, there's a portrait, I'm going to look at it and then walk to the next one. So that's exciting too.
Well, and then what I'm excited to see in your work is if you continue to come off the wall a little bit and challenge yourself to see in even more dimensionality, I guess, then what will that do to the work that remains on the wall? I think, sometimes when artists go back and forth, their two-dimensional work becomes even more three-dimensional because they're thinking about what those unseen sides can look like, and it creates a depth. Or they can swing the total opposite way and just purposely create really flat work. So right. I think it'll be fun to watch where you're going.
Thank you. Well, I hope it is. I'm sure there'll be some hair pulled out too along the way, but that's great.
in this exhibition, you are using some untraditional materials. I'm hoping you can talk a little bit about your series, The Hatch and Release.
Okay. So those two pieces, I have a hard time figuring out how to talk about the work in this show, because basically a lot of the work is one large piece that is made up of a bunch of multiples of smaller pieces, if that makes any sense. But so for Release and Hatch, the two pieces that they coincide, they go together. They sort of are inspired by the same aspects of nature, the same research that I did to create those two pieces. But in Release, first of all, that's got a weaving on it, and then spread along the wall is these forms that are made out of wire, just a thin moldable wire, and then hog casings, although they may just be sausage casings. I realized today, I'm not sure technically whether they come from hogs or not, but basically the intestines of an animal that's used to make sausage, you can buy it at the grocery store. And I just get it and then soak it in water so that it becomes pliable, and then I can wrap it around the wire forms. And it looks, and actually is, technically skin, but it has a nice warm tone to it, and it's real translucent. So within that form, I call them organs, but within the form, in most of them, I also put this blue roving wool that has sort of a mix between being felted or just being sort of loose and furry. So that is the Release piece. And then Hatch are these brown forms that are essentially roving wool. And if you don't know what roving wool, it's the wool that's used for felting, which is, I don't know how to describe it best, but like when people kind of create these dense forms with wool and shapes, that's felting. And think of like if you throw your wool sweater in the wash and it shrinks, it's essentially felting. So that is the wool before it's been felted, but then I dipped it in paper pulp, which stiffened the wool a little bit, but also created these little white flecks on the wool itself. And then took what I had and shaped it into these small forms that spread out along the wall. So, yeah, what else would you like to know about those two pieces?
Well, I think both of their titles, Release and Hatch, indicate a theme that you have in other places in the show as well, in terms of it's this dispersion of the inside of something. And the way that both of those pieces are placed on the wall, it does add emotion to it, as if the wind were blowing a seed, or if I know in these cases it's not necessarily a plant or an animal, but to me it evokes this feeling of dispersion. And is that your intention with those pieces?
Definitely. When I talked earlier about moving from the object to the process, or the object to like the experience, those two were definitely about an action that nature will go through. And so while I didn't want them to literally look like what inspired them, they definitely kind of grew out of some research I did just on seeds and how they germinate. I mean, real simple things, but they're fascinating. I mean, they have all these different layers and parts to them, and they go through all these steps in order to survive, and then eventually thrive by creating a shoot and creating a plant. But the weaving that's in each of the pieces is what I consider the seed coat, which is like, think on a peanut that really thin layer, or like on a coconut, it's the thick outer layer of the seed that acts like a protective layer for a portion of the seed's life. And then it breaks apart to allow the seed, if the conditions are right, to allow the seed to grow. And so definitely that idea of dispersal and wanting to break open and go out into the world, however that's going to happen. So yeah, like while you said, it's not necessarily animal or plant, it definitely is inspired, or they both are definitely inspired by that process.
And you touched very, very eloquently on the meaning of your show, actually, in that description. Can you talk about integument?
Yes, and I had said this in some of my social media that I would, what is integument? So I looked it up. No, I had actually looked it up before, but no, it is a protective cover or covering that's on an animal or in a plant that just is a layer. It's a protective layer that is can act as a barrier. It can act, like I said, as a protection. But that idea of layer is huge for me. And also, I found out that the actual medical term for skin is integument, which like made it even that much better, because sometimes my work sort of ties into the medical world. So yeah, integument layers. The integumentary system includes obviously skin, but also it includes hair and husks and nails and shells and the seed coat, so many different things. And so because my work deals a lot with layers and uses layers to get across both my aesthetic and my the meaning behind my work, integument just seemed like the perfect title to use. And then this particular work too, I've had the title actually. I didn't know actually it would be the title for the show, but I've had that word in my head probably the duration of making this show. And so any of the pieces that was there, like, okay, how can this be a layer? How can this reference skin, a husk, a shell, anything like that? So it definitely plays a big role in this body of work. And then there even is skin, hog skin, and then and the wool. Wool is hair. So there's actual integumentary items in the show as well. So does that get at it, or
Absolutely, yes, absolutely. Okay. And I think one thing that has been consistent in your work for years is that intention with word choice. And in this particular show, you've included some text, and I know you've done that in the past as well. Can you talk about your choice of words in terms of not just this title, but also, maybe some of the titles of the individual pieces, and then we can talk about the installation of Disperse as well.
Okay, yeah. So I have a love-hate relationship with text and in my art, because I learned long ago, and I still just feel that there's a lot of weight put on text when it's used in art, I feel like, because it's recognizable, so we look at it and we want to read it. I suppose I could have done it all in a different language, and then I could have avoided people knowing what it said. So yes, text is, I'm definitely deliberate about the text that I use, but I also deliberate a lot about it. Amy's been, fallen victim to me, like waiting to the last minute to give my titles, and then even changing them after I've thought I landed on a title. So yeah, they're definitely a challenge. But in this particular case, I've talked about integument, but then with most of the pieces, my goal had been for the title to be an action, and so a verb instead of a noun. And that goes back to the idea that the work looks at process in nature and process in making rather than the object. The only place I failed with that was the weavings. Weaving itself is can be a verb, but the titles are more tied to the individual pieces themselves. But with the other four, which are disperse, release, hatch, and molt, those are all actions that species will go through, including humans, in their lifetime. And so that was super intentional to use those. And they're semi-scientific words. I had a couple real scientific words and they sounded cool, but I didn't even know how to pronounce them. So I decided probably not a good idea to work with those. And then if you look at the title integument being a noun, I just go back to the idea that I still like it being a noun because it's a record of the work, a record of the process, both of making it, but also the experience in nature, just like an exoskeleton is like a record.
And to me, it also is a nod towards the title of the exhibition is wrapping all the work under itself. So it makes sense that the exterior would be a noun and it's holding all of the action, because that's what your show is doing. And then referencing the installation piece Disperse, which is there's a lot of text in that work that people may or may not notice right away, because there's so many facets to that installation. So if you could just tell us about the piece and talk more about the specific components of the pieces as well.
So Disperse is at this point, a pile of seeds they're handmade seeds that are about, I don't know, they're about 5 inches probably long. And they embody on one side a photograph that I've taken. My son took maybe 3 of the shots, but otherwise they're all photographs that I've taken. And then on the other side is text. The photographs are, again, going back to the experiences. And so if you have seen my old work, there was a piece called an inventory that was a series of tags that had photographs on them of the specimens that I've collected, as well as parts of my body. And so then again, going back to the idea of object, well, these I wanted to be more about capturing the moment, small moments that all add up to this stockpile of seeds. And so they're mostly moments taken in nature. Some of them are taken, either in my house or along walks of more man-made subjects. And so the idea is to just have this collection, again, going back to collections of memories, of moments. And ideally, at some point, and I haven't totally figured this out yet, in part because of COVID, but that these seeds would be dispersed, would be sent out into the world, much like seeds are sent out into the world. They rely on so many other factors to get out into the world, from wind to birds to animals eating them and then releasing them. So, like that idea of them being spread out, these moments, these memories, these experiences being spread out into the world. So that's maybe the next phase of this. At one point, I was hoping that they would get moved around the gallery space, but we can't touch them at this point. So they are just this, right now, this pile in waiting, I guess, for that time. So then the text side, just since we were talking about text, the word started with the word gift, because these moments are gifts, gift with a T, not gift. And then there's over 300 of them. So thesaurus can only take you so far with one word. So they've developed over time, or evolved over time, to include many other words that are like actions in nature, that then the source would bring me to another word that I found interesting. I also looked at architectural terms, clothing, terms used in fashion, and tied those also into the text that's on the opposite side of the photograph. And then I should have brought one with me, because if you look closely, which, as Amy said earlier, that's always been a goal in my work, is to get you to look closer. You'll see there's something inside about 2/3 of the seed. And I sort of brought with me some of my old work. And so inside are these little pinned figures, either bugs or humans, made out of Duralar, which is like an opaque mylar. And so they're inside the seeds, and you can pick them up and shake them. And it's, again, sort of like the idea of a gift, that the seed continues to give gifts as it grows or as it spreads or what have you.
Well, I think that's one thing that's so fascinating about this piece is you're so intentional about all of the choices you're making in terms of material, but also the thought process behind that these are gifts, and then your intention was to be able to have people walk away with some seeds of their own, and therefore disperse the seeds throughout the community. And because of COVID, you've had to get very creative in reaching an audience. And one of the solutions you had come up with was presenting some videos of you even making these these seed pods, so people can watch. Can you talk about what does it feel like to you to suddenly become almost a performative artist?
Well, it wasn't what I wanted per se. I mean, I have a teaching background. I taught photography for years, and I do love to teach. I was saying to Amy earlier, it's a whole different ballgame for me when I know it's being recorded. And I can get over that for sure. But it's, I love the idea. So to back up and talk about the live streams that I've been having for Disperse, it started where I thought, well, I'll just go into the gallery space. We can't have an opening, but I can go into the gallery space and just sew. And if people want to come in and watch me sow the seeds, they can come in and watch me sow the seeds. And then we thought, well, maybe that would still be a little too risky or tricky. And so let's just live stream, and I can just do it at any point. And I had heard at one point about a woman, young woman who studies, and she had like 1 million followers on YouTube of people just watching her study. And so I thought, well, I don't know if I would do that, but people might want to watch someone sowing seeds. And so that is kind of the idea behind them. And so we did one yesterday. Unfortunately, I had a few technical difficulties, but there is, I think, at least 10 minutes, maybe 15 of me sewing. And then I think I'm going to do again is pre-record me sewing. So I guess the idea is if someone's interested to have sort of a background soothing visual, and actually the seeds, the materials of plastic, so it makes a lot of noise when I sew. You could turn on your own music and just watch my hands sow the seed. And so that's kind of the idea behind those. I think moving forward, what we're going to do with my last 2 live streams, instead of have a live stream, I am going to be in the gallery space, and people can come and visit me while I'm there. I'll just be there for sort of like a lunch hour, noon hour, sowing seeds. And then if people want to meet one-on-one, 2-on-1, we can talk about the work in the show. So that's the goal, I think, with those. But you're right, it's been interesting. And I wouldn't say it's been bad having to kind of work around COVID. I think there's been some fun, interesting, clever things that artists have come up with. And it's good to stretch ourselves a little bit. So
yeah, I really enjoyed watching your I almost called them podcasts, because in my head I'm thinking you're sewing these
that's
pods.
a great idea.
But it's very meditative just to watch you do these repetitive stitches. Is it meditative for you as the creator when you're in this process?
Absolutely. I mean, We have an article in, or Duluth Art Institute has an article in their Hue magazine about fiber this last month, and that's one of the things I love about thread work and sewing in general, and also the weaving that I did. That there's a lot of creative energy that goes into coming up with the ideas that will make a body of work, and what's the content going to be, and how are they going to hang on the wall, and what materials are you going to use. And so it's sometimes nice to be able to like get to a point where you can let go of the decision making and just sew or just weave. Yeah, so it's just a wonderful monotony to be able to just relax into making those things. I mean, obviously things come up and get frustrating, and that's when you start cursing and stuff, but like mostly it's just a super relaxing thing. And the seeds were great because I could bring them anywhere. I had a little shoe box. I could be driving in the car. Well, I wouldn't be driving, but I could be in the passenger seat, and like I can go through all the steps of making the seeds while in the car. So that was a nice aspect of those too. Sort of a sweet little, extra to making that particular body of work. So.
Well, and that makes them portable. And again, that just adds another layer to the piece, because that's what seeds are. They're portable entities of life that are being driven around.
Driven around by the driver. I got this.
Well, one thing about your exhibition that's on view right now that was unexpected for me were all the shadows. And I have found, being in that space, that the shadows to me become meditative, especially the weaving that's in the molt that is in the alcove that's suspended, and it starts to move with the air current, and then you can watch the shadow on the floor moving as well. Did you experience that in the studio, or is that something that just happens in the gallery?
Yes and no. I'm in my studio space right now. I have big windows that bring natural light into the room during the day, and I knew that I wouldn't have the natural light for the most part in the Morrison Gallery. But I also have like pretty short ceilings, and I don't have gallery lighting or anything like that. So I wasn't really able to experience what the shadows would truly be like. I knew that they would be enhanced by being in the larger space and having control over the lighting. But when listening to you talk, I was thinking about hatch and then also release, and how those are the smaller pieces, and how the light really casts some interesting shadows, and that creates sort of a pattern, or yeah, like a pattern, a repetitive pattern throughout the work that is also sort of soothing to look at, because it's reminiscent of quilting, or just as humans we're drawn to pattern. With the molt piece that you're talking about that's suspended, that the first time I kind of discovered that process, and that wanted to work further, I had it hanging in the studio and was super excited about the way the light changes as it moves, because it will come through it, but then it will light the front of it or the back of it, so it just, that really excited me. And so that was definitely something that I was looking for within the show for that particular piece. So
and it happened with all of the pieces in the show. I think that the shadows are working with some of the weavings and the lighting in the larger room where the majority of the molt pieces are. I think they really draw the viewer in, that translucency. And one thing we haven't talked about is you do have some stitches in those pieces as well. Can you talk about that too?
Sure. So the mold pieces that they are made out of infused mulberry paper, or infused with wax. So let me back up there. Mulberry paper. A lot of people have asked me. It's just a Japanese paper that is it's thin enough that light can pass through it. So I liked that aspect of it. It's also super tough. It's got long fibers, so it doesn't tear very easily. So I used it for the weavings, but I also used it for molt, and it's a warm mulberry paper that I infused with encaustic wax. And so all that means is the the wax gets sort of heated into and absorbed by the paper, and that makes it even more translucent. And then from there, I wanted to add some stitches in there because, as Amy had said earlier, a lot of my work, I like people to look at it from afar and kind of see it as a whole, and then have some kind of little trigger or detail that is going to bring them in closer to the details. And so that's that was sort of the tool I used, I guess you could call it, with having the thread work in there, but also and also partly to add to that is that the thread is blue and the paper is very warm, so that contrast would be another way to sort of draw people's attention. But then thinking of it also as suturing, I said earlier I think about medical, the medical world a little bit in my work, the idea of aging, and so having suturing in there, and like just the idea of you've discarded this layer of skin, how can you piece it back together again? And if you do look closely at some exoskeletons, you'll see, I don't know what to call it, but there's like little threads from where it's split open so that the insect could get out of the exoskeleton. So all that is in the back of my mind when adding those stitches into the work.
Well, I think the show came together amazingly well, and I really hope people are able to get down to the George Morrison Gallery at the Duluth Art Institute within the next 6 weeks or so. It's on view through December 31st, 2020. And Susanna is going to be available for questions. I don't have any questions right now. If Alyssa wants to jump in and let us know. Otherwise, you're talking about stitches. I do want to mention that the Duluth Art Institute, we're hosting a book club, and our first book is The Subversive Stitch. And if you are interested in details, please check out our website. If you're interested in learning more about Susanna, please check out her website, and you can follow her on social media as well.
So hopefully people can hear me. So we have a question. Somebody said, I love your work. Do you have a sense of the experience that you wanted to create, or has it just evolved over time? I think she was talking in the very beginning about that experience you wanted to create for the viewer.
I think that's a great question. I think that has not been an obvious thing on the forefront of my mind of what I want that experience exactly to be, except to say that, I hopefully will be able to pull out some of that wonder, some of that curiosity by looking at the work. If people don't know it's references nature, that's totally fine by me. More I just getting the chance to have a moment to slow down and look at details and look at abstract forms on the wall, I think is important. Beyond that, yeah, I think one thing that I did differently with this show was I really sort of merged or integrated the different bodies of work. So I said earlier, there's a lot of pieces that are multiples. Well, I separated them out a little bit so that they would overlap with other pieces in the show. Like the seeds, for instance, that pile starts in one room and moves into the next room. Or molt is actually not 12 different pieces, and 3 of them are in one section, and the other 9 are in, am I adding right? Yeah, the other 9 are in the larger room. And so that, to me, it was a way to, again, reference nature because it's messy. It's all things mixed together. And one thing I noticed this spring on those hikes that I went on, you would see, or we would see things, seed pods from last fall still sitting on their branches while new buds were being formed. And so just that whole mixing up, the integration between the pieces was something new and something fun, because it's installation art. I can kind of take the space and do what I want with it. So hopefully that answers the question.
Yeah, I'm glad that you addressed the work on the floor, because I think that that's something that kind of gives maybe some visitors some pause when they see it. They might not have ever seen work displayed on the floor like that. So that's kind of interesting that you bring that up. Do you have anything else to add to it, or is that pretty much, you were referencing nature?
Yeah, or just, yeah, I'm not sure. I don't like to force the experience on people either. I want them to be able to, because when we experience art, so much of our own life comes into it, so just allowing for that to happen. I've been meeting with people in the space, which I'm happy to do if anybody wants to get together. And I've had different reactions. Like one person was like kind of grossed out by the hatch piece, because it reminded her of just knowing there's bugs and spiders and things in her house that might like get hatched and like take over her kitchen or something. And so and I love that. I want people to have that kind of experience if they can. Like, I don't think it has to all be beautiful. I don't think they have to love it. If they hate it, that's a response, and so that's okay too. It's if they're just walked right through and don't want to look at the work, is that wouldn't be so much fun.
Okay, one more question. Actually, we have two more. Can a person purchase a single seed from you?
Oh, yes. Contact me. Because, yeah. All right, I'll just say it. So, as Amy had talked about earlier, my original plan before COVID hit was to have a closing ceremony. She doesn't even know about this. And at the closing ceremony, anybody who showed up was going to be able to walk away with the seed. So, if you come and look at the work and chat with me a little bit, you could probably walk away with the seed. Well, I can't have a closing ceremony anyway, so
Right.
yeah.
The last thing is, other than, live broadcasting, you making the seeds, are you working on anything else?
During the actual broadcast?
Just like in your personal studio practice.
I have not done much since the show went up. I kind of took October off, but there's been enough activity just surrounding the show that, I've been meeting with people periodically down in the space. I've been photographing it for my website. I've had in these live streams, but I have been in the studio a couple times and started to think about what I want to do next. And I mean, I can tell I want to work with my hands again. Like, I sort of itching to do that, but at the same time, I sort of want a little bit of a break as well.
Yeah, and we should mention too that you were working on these pieces all the way through installation. So the work is very new. I mean, certainly some of it was completed well before installation, but the process of the show went right up until the very end. And that's the nature of installation work, is that some of the work doesn't get done until you're in the space. So you really haven't had too much time since the opening to decompress. I think a lot of artists are making themselves pause after an exhibition, because to allow that space can honor the work that you've just created.
Yeah, that's a great way to look at it. Yeah, and then, like, I think if we were to jump right back into something, it would maybe be not only too tired to do it, but tainted by the work that I was just making, and not have a fresh enough perspective to be able to see differently or see completely new things unfold. So,
Mm-hmm.
trying to let myself have that space.
You know, since you do spend so much time in nature, I'm wondering if you, as an artist, do you feel that pace of change in season in your work?
That's a good question. What first came to mind was thinking about how if you look at this body of work, it's very monochromatic. And I started it in the winter last year. So, and I love it. I love white on white. I love the idea of very little color. But I also love color. And so the seeds obviously provide a little bit of splash of color. Yeah, I'm sure. I mean, I know you know, in general in my life, not just in my artwork, that I want to be in tune to the fact that now their days are shorter and I have to sort of respect that and slow down a little bit. And whereas in the summertime, you know, waking up with the sun, maybe not the sun, but waking up when, you know, earlier because the sun is already up, I know I have more energy, and I'm sure that influences like how I make the work and how productive perhaps that I am with it. So does that kind of answer the question? I don't know if you were more like specific natural.
Curious to hear, because your work is so based, at least this show in particular is so based in a response to the natural world. You know, I'm wondering if you felt that response within your ability to create at any given moment based on the season. So,
well, I might start paying attention to that even more now. I don't know. I mean, maybe I read more too in the winter. That's when I get the books read about you know, about natural history and stuff. Yeah. So
yeah.
I'll pay more attention to that.
Great. Well, Susanna, thank you so much for your time. We've been so thrilled to have you in the gallery, and we're just honored that you continue to create work. And I hope everyone immediately jumps on your social media and starts following your journey.
Thanks so much, Amy. Thanks, Alyssa, and thanks to the Duluth Art Institute.
All right. Thank you.